may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, I need to get this disclaimer out here. Okay, so if you were unable to come out to this live stream, A, you should have been there. It was crazy. It was a lot of fun. And B, this was a high stakes draft that was a live draft. Most of these leagues that you're going to find that are with this kind of buy-in, I mean, they have 8-hour timers, and it's just because you can't really set it up to make it a live draft because it's really hard to find 11 other owners that are willing to put up that type of money and they can all commit to the same time. But here, obviously, the flock has grown to a point where we have so many people wanting to get into these leagues where we've had the luxury of where we can set up these $500 buy-in leagues. We can do a live draft with a 90-second timer. So, I mean, I want to really let everyone know that these picks were made just kind of going with the flow. I mean, the pressure was on, and at the same time, I mean, they didn't have that much time to actually think about these selections. And with all that being said, this video was very hard to come through and make a list of what I believe to be the worst picks in this draft. Now, of course, I want to say this with just kind of a tongue-in-cheek type of tone because I'm wrong all the time. I mean, in the majority of our flock leagues last year, yes, we crushed, but the ones we didn't was actually the redraft formats where we did 2 of those drafts. So yeah, I want to put that disclaimer out there that I am wrong all the time. So my opinion, honestly, you can completely disregard it if you think that you have a great pulse on a player I'm calling overvalued. But yeah, let's dive into this $500 Patreon flock draft. Let's talk about my least favorite picks and why. But please, guys, go down there, drop that like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know what your least favorite pick out of this list was. And yeah, let's dive into this. And let's start it off with one of my own selections. And at the time, I honestly thought this was great value. Let's talk about Kyler Murray, me taking him at the 607. So we were on the clock at the 506 after drafting Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Swift, and Robert Woods. And at the 506, there were all of the elite quarterbacks still available. I mean, the only quarterback off the board at that point was Patrick Mahomes. You had Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, and Kyler Murray all available to you. But at the same time, there was a wide receiver that I was in love with. There was a wide receiver that I really wanted to have on this team, and that was T. Higgins. So I said live on stream and I went, you know what? We are drafting T. Higgins here. We're most likely not going to be able to go through and get one of those elite quarterbacks at the 607 because we'd imagine all of them are going to go by that pick. Well, we decide to take T. Higgins in the 5th. And then at the 607, right after Odell Beckham Jr. is drafted, we go, okay, we got Kyler Murray. This is the quarterback 4 in my rankings for 2020. And he actually has the quarterback 3 in ADP and high stakes redraft leagues. And here we draft him as the quarterback 5 in the middle of the 6th round. And at the time of this selection, I mean, I was ecstatic. I thought that this was a great pick, and I was really happy with how our draft was shaping out. But the problem was, if you go down and you look at the rest of this draft board right now, I mean, what you actually had is down there at the 13-11. So the very end of the 13th round, you had both Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers going off the board. You had Matthew Stafford as a 12th round selection. You had Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Deshaun Watson as 14th round picks. And what this tells us is this tells us our initial plan to go in and just draft a quarterback extremely late, wait until the very end and get someone like Joe Burrow. That would have been a much better decision. Because if we go back and if we look at Kyler Murray at the 607, so we decided to draft Kyler Murray there. If we were going to be drafting a different player, we most likely would have been going with running back Myles Gaskin. And of course, it's really easy to look at it with hindsight. And like I said, I mean, we were on the clock. We had that pressure on it. So it's a little bit harder to actually make this decision on the clock. And that's why it's so useful to go through and revisit this. That way, next time you're on the clock, you can make a better decision. But here we ended up taking Kyler Murray at the 607 over Myles Gaskin. Myles Gaskin would have been that other player we would have taken. And if we go down to the 13th round where Joe Burrow decided to go, we actually took Rashad Penny in that same round because we had a massive hole at running back too, and we were just trying to get as many darts thrown at the dartboard as possible. So what we have to ask ourselves here in this scenario is after drafting Kyler Murray in the middle of the 6th, passing up on Myles Gaskin, and then being forced to take Rashad Penny over Joe Burrow later, what would we rather have? Would we rather have Joe Burrow and Myles Gaskin, or would we rather have Kyler Murray and Rashad Penny? And I think the easy answer to be had there is the Joe Burrow and the Myles Gaskin. So while we thought we were getting a great value on Kyler Murray, and that's definitely later than he goes in most drafts, we should have understood that quarterback, you can wait a little bit longer. You don't have to get one of those top guys in rounds 5, 6, 7 if you have the potential to go through and wait for someone like a Joe Burrow at the very end. But yeah, I want to set this tone off in this video talking about some of my mistakes, and let's just keep it going. Let's talk about my mistakes before we bring up any other mistakes that I think other people made. And let's talk about my selection of Hollywood Brown. And this is another instance of me going through and, despite my current roster construction, just thinking that we need to be going value, value, value. Now, I will point out that this is not a regular draft at all. Now, if this was a regular league that I know a lot of y'all are going to be playing in, that is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, we would not have made this decision. But given that this league, you have to start 3 wide receivers and you can start 3 flex spots at the same time, we went into it going, we want some wide receiver depth here. I want to be playing 5 to 6 wide receivers on a weekly basis. And keep that in mind when in the 9th round, we decided to take Hollywood Brown. So we took our 7th wide receiver before we drafted our 2nd running back in this draft. And I am not that upset with that thought process. But what we needed to do a better job of is looking at those running backs that we were considering, and we were overestimating our ability to be able to find that value in round 10. Because we were looking at wide receiver and we were going, after Hollywood Brown, there's a significant drop off in tiers. I mean, you have Rondale Moore, Darnell Mooney, Russell Gage, Paris Campbell, and Terrace Marshall all going off after Hollywood Brown. Where at running back, there were a lot of intriguing names. You had Leonard Fournette, Tony Pollard, A.J. Dillon, Melvin Gordon, Gus Edwards, and Kenyon Drake. And I was thinking, okay, let's get Hollywood Brown here. We are going to see that fall off at wide receiver. Then in the 10th round, we can come back around and take A.J. Dillon. Now, if you were in the live draft, you know SPAC comes through with a donation, so it highlights at the very top of the draft room going, A.J. Dillon's a great value here. And then all of a sudden, A.J. Dillon goes at the beginning of the 10th, kind of ruining that plan for us. He probably would have gone regardless. I just want to give SPAC a hard time. So this is more so just a mistake that I made, and that we thought we were getting great value. We drafted Hollywood Brown as the wide receiver 53 in this draft. And if you look over there on Patreon at my rankings that are coming out in about 10 days, we have Hollywood Brown ranked as the wide receiver 43 for this upcoming season. And he has an ADP in high stakes redraft leagues of the wide receiver 41. So if his ADP in those high stakes redraft leagues is wide receiver 41 and he falls to wide receiver 53 for us, I am drooling at my mouth. I'm going, this is a player I want. We can wait on running back just one more time. And what I need to do going forward is I need to be less stubborn. I know that I think we had the correct decision of going and hitting the wide receivers in the middle rounds here, but we just pushed it a little too far because this team with A.J. Dillon on it instead would have been significantly better. But now let's go over to some picks that I did not make. Let's go make fun of some other people for their own picks. Let's talk about this Michael Pittman Jr. selection at wide receiver 43. And we actually just got done talking about Michael Pittman Jr. on a Dynasty live stream that we did the other day. But with Pittman Jr., I will say, honestly, if you look at high stakes redraft leagues, this was not even a reach for what high stakes drafters are doing. He is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 44. And in this league, he went as the wide receiver 43. But this is going to be a wide receiver that I am significantly lower on compared to consensus. I have him in the wide receiver 53 range of my own rankings, so about 10 spots lower than where he is currently going in the wide receiver stack up. But if we pull up Michael Pittman right now, I mean, he goes at the beginning of round 8, and the players that go directly after him, you have James Robinson, Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel just posted a wide receiver 27 season this past year. Elijah Moore, we take Will Fuller in this round. Antonio Brown, Michael Gallup, Corey Davis, McCole Hardman, Mike Williams. Don't necessarily know if we would have those last guys over them, but regardless, Curtis Samuel, you have seen the production before. Curtis Samuel, still extremely young. I believe Curtis Samuel is 24 years old, while you actually have Michael Pittman at 23. So it's not a massive, massive difference with what you're finding between these two wide receivers with their age, despite Michael Pittman going into year 2 compared to Curtis Samuel already on his second contract in the NFL. And this more so goes with the questions that I have around Michael Pittman himself and also around Carson Wentz. And this is something I'm going to be talking about all offseason with any player that we are drafting out of Indianapolis. This is one of the main reasons I decided to take Tyreek Hill in this draft over Jonathan Taylor. And that is, if you were looking at that Indianapolis Colts situation, I think that the quarterback room is disgusting as is based on the past 2 years that we have seen from Carson Wentz being near dead last in the NFL in adjusted yards per attempt. I mean, it has been disgusting, his play. And I understand a lot of people are going to be making the argument, well, Mason, he's going to bounce back with a much better offensive line in Indianapolis. He's going to bounce back with Frank Reich as his head coach once again. And I understand that argument. I am sympathetic towards that argument where we can see that in his past, Carson Wentz did have upside to be a top quarterback in the NFL. I mean, we all know that while, yes, he did not win the Super Bowl himself, his season that year was on pace to make him the MVP of the league. While, yes, this is a player that does have upside, we have to also acknowledge the fact that he has a very low floor. You could make the argument that Carson Wentz has been the worst starting quarterback in the NFL that has maintained a job over the past 2 years. And on top of this, I mean, with Michael Pittman himself, I am not even so sure that he's the wide receiver one to own in Indianapolis. I think if you look at his prospect profile coming out of USC, where he was never hyper productive, he didn't break out a young age. I mean, he stayed there all 4 years, a bunch of red flags on a profile that you don't want to see for a wide receiver prospect. Comparing that to a Paris Campbell that, in my opinion, was a more impressive wide receiver coming out of Ohio State. And while I understand Paris Campbell had a very disappointing rookie season, so did Michael Pittman. I don't understand how people are looking at Michael Pittman as some breakout hype wide receiver compared to someone like Henry Ruggs. And I'm not even saying Henry Ruggs should be drastically more valuable than Michael Pittman. But what I am saying is you have Pittman consistently going in round 7 and round 8 of these drafts right here compared to Henry Ruggs, who's a late round 10, early round 11 selection, just in a completely different tier. And I don't see much of a difference at all between those two wide receivers. But like I said at the beginning of this player breakdown, high stakes drafters, people who are putting up a lot of money every draft that they play in, they are actually drafting Michael Pittman as the wide receiver 44 right here. So it's not far off at all from the wide receiver 43. So I am asking this in a genuine way. I am not trying to be a troll here or anything. Obviously, these high stakes players are seeing something that I'm not. So please go down to the comment section. If you're a fan of Michael Pittman Jr., let me know what I'm missing here. And I'm not trying to be a troll. I'm legitimately thinking that I have to be missing something. Please let me know your bullish case on Michael Pittman Jr. And now another player that I don't understand the hype for this upcoming season, I am considerably lower than the rest of consensus on him, is going to be Deebo Samuel. So Deebo Samuel in this draft went as the wide receiver 36. I have him in our own rankings coming out over there on Patreon as our wide receiver 46 this year in a completely different tier. And in high stakes leagues, he's actually being drafted as the wide receiver 37. So a very similar situation to what you actually had with Michael Pittman here, where he didn't go that far off of what you would actually see in a real high stakes format. But I'm looking at the players that went behind him, and I'm going, I would rather have every single one of these wide receivers over Deebo Samuel. So Deebo Samuel goes at the 704 in this league, directly ahead of Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson, someone who was much more productive this past year. I would make the argument that he's getting a quarterback upgrade, and also Curtis Samuel leaving this offense. Now, yes, you can't expect Robbie Anderson to be the wide receiver 28 yet again, given the fact that Christian McCaffrey is going to be soaking up so much of that volume in this offense this upcoming year. You also have Jerry Jeudy, who we took at the 706. And trust me, guys, I don't love Jerry Jeudy at all. I think Jerry Jeudy's actually a fade in fantasy this year. I think he is being overvalued. But I mean, he is going as usually the wide receiver 31, 32, 33 in high stakes drafts. He falls here to the wide receiver 38. So we're going, you know what? I don't love it, but we'll just draft him. We don't have him anywhere. So let's take him. Also, Jalen Waddle, Jarvis Landry, Rashad Bateman, all going behind Deebo Samuel. And the problem here with Samuel is he is actually a wide receiver that is near the league bottom in his average depth of target over the past 2 years now. I mean, every single year, he is at the very bottom. He is only getting targeted literally at the line of scrimmage. He's not a traditional wide receiver at all. You can't even call him a wide receiver, as crazy as that sounds. And while that's fine, he can be hyper productive. I mean, if you put Deebo Samuel on a Drew Brees-led offense, if you put him with Phillip Rivers, a quarterback that was looking to check the ball down, someone that was very stationary, he could thrive in fantasy. He could be a low-end wide receiver 1 if everything broke right. I'm not saying that's ever going to happen in San Francisco. So we understand that a player with that kind of usage can be productive in fantasy. But the problem is Trey Lance coming into this situation, I think, is literally the exact opposite of a fit with Deebo Samuel, where we know that those wide receivers that have an extremely low average depth of target, when are they most valuable? They're most valuable when a quarterback needs a check down option, when a quarterback can't use his mobility on his own to extend plays and to either rush to pick up the first down or to extend it and just look deeper downfield. I mean, we kind of saw this with Alvin Kamara and his own targets falling off with Taysom Hill coming under center. You see this time and time again. Lamar Jackson, someone not checking down to the running back side of his backfield. And I know a lot of people are going, well, Mason, Deebo Samuel isn't a running back. Well, he has the average depth of target of a running back. That's why I'm saying he's not a wide receiver. He's some kind of hybrid, something in between, at least how Kyle Shanahan decides to use him in this offense. And throw it on the fact that Trey Lance coming in, he is going to be that rushing quarterback. He was extremely aggressive down the field in college. It's not a fit with Deebo Samuel at all. And throw on the fact that you have George Kittle as easily the target leader on this offense. Brandon Ayuk looks significantly better in his own rookie year, and he fits a much better with Trey Lance. And I mean, I hate to use this term. I think so many people overuse it. But if there was ever going to be a player called injury prone in the NFL, it's Deebo Samuel. And that's honestly not even up for debate. Now, let's talk about some other incorrect decisions here. Let's go over real quick and let's talk about some tight ends, TJ Hockenson and Mark Andrews. So you actually had TJ Hockenson going as the tight end 6 in this draft, and we have him as our tight end 4. So I would think that you would like this value on TJ Hockenson. And he has a high stakes redraft ADP of a tight end 5. So you think that based on where the other tight ends went in this draft, that's great value. But the problem here is how tight end was valued in this draft. I mean, taking TJ Hockenson at the beginning of the 5th round, and the same thing here with Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews went at the 501, TJ Hockenson went at the 504. They went ahead of players like Josh Jacobs, T. Higgins, Josh Allen, Brandon Ayuk, Kenny Golladay, Kareem Hunt, Javonte Williams. Based on the tight ends that went later in this draft, I think that this is very bad value. Mark Andrews and a TJ Hockenson went at the beginning of the 5th. The wide receivers that went in that same round, they were T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Juju Smith-Schuster, Brandon Ayuk, and Kenny Golladay. Now, the tight ends that went in the 12th were Logan Thomas, Mike Gesicki, Irv Smith, and Hunter Henry. The wide receivers that went in that same round were Sammy Watkins and Nelson Aguilar. So let's pose this question like this. Would you rather have Logan Thomas and Jamar Chase, Logan Thomas and T. Higgins, Logan Thomas and Brandon Ayuk? Or would you rather have, just say, Mark Andrews and Sammy Watkins? I think the answer is easily the stud wide receiver with the, I don't even want to say low end tight end 1. Logan Thomas was the tight end 4 in drafts last year. You can just say the same thing with Mike Gesicki. We know they're all in the same tier at this moment. So those tight end draft picks were bad, in my opinion, not necessarily because of the tight ends themselves, but more so just because of taking a tight end in that range instead of going wide receiver or running back. But thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. And of course, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment letting me know what you thought the worst pick in this draft was. And yeah, that's it. I will see y'all with the video tomorrow. Thank you so much for everyone joining the flock in Will, Wesley, Ethan, Sabres, Jonah, Austin, Andrew, Doug, Brandon, and Adam. Thank you so much, my dudes.